The sky was clear, and the sun shone brightly over a quiet town. The church, decorated with white flowers and golden details, welcomed the guests for the most anticipated wedding of the year, the union of Roberto and Helena. Roberto, a successful businessman and widower for many years, had finally found a new love. Helena, an elegant woman full of class, seemed like the perfect companion for him. However, few knew that, for one of the attendees, this wedding was not a cause for joy. Lucas, Roberto's 17-year-old black son, stood at the back of the church, watching the commotion. He didn't like Helena, not at all. Something about her gaze had bothered him ever since she entered his father's life. He had tried to talk to Roberto several times, but his father, smitten with his new relationship, wouldn't listen. The young man had always had a sharp intuition, and now, more than ever, something told him that Helena was hiding dark secrets. As the guests settled into their seats, Lucas grew restless. He had spent the last few days investigating Helena on his own, looking for information that could save his father from a trap. But what he had discovered was far more shocking than he could have ever imagined. The woman, who was about to marry his father, had a hidden past, and Lucas knew that if he didn't act, that marriage would seal his father's fate forever. At the altar, Roberto smiled, completely oblivious to what was about to happen. The priest was already in place to begin the ceremony. Lucas's heart raced as the crucial moment approached. He knew he couldn't let the ceremony go forward, but he had no idea how to reveal the truth in the right way. When Helena entered the church, dazzling in her wedding dress, Lucas's tension increased. He had to act, but how? What could he say that would make everyone believe him? And more importantly, what would become of his family's reputation after the bombshell he was about to drop? Lucas closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and made a decision. He was going to stop the wedding. He couldn't let his father be deceived in such a way. But what Lucas didn't yet know was that the truth about Helena was more devastating than he could have ever imagined. Lucas felt a chill down his spine as he watched Helena walk to the altar. Each step she took seemed like a countdown to disaster. He needed to act quickly, but what could he say? His mind raced, forming sentences, but nothing seemed impactful enough to stop the wedding without making him appear irrational or petty. The priest began the ceremony. "Dear friends and family, we are gathered here today." Lucas looked at his father, who couldn't take his eyes off Helena, completely blinded by her charm. The young man knew he only had one chance. He slowly stood up from his chair, his heart pounding so loudly it echoed in his head. Just a few steps from the altar, the priest asked the classic question. "If anyone has any objections to this marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace." Silence filled the church. It was the moment. Lucas felt the urge and, before he could hesitate, shouted, "I have something to say." All eyes turned to him, including his father's, who looked confused and visibly uncomfortable. Helena remained impassive, though her eyes gleamed with a mix of surprise and suppressed anger. She hadn't expected this. Lucas was nervous, but he couldn't turn back now. "Dad, you can't marry her." Lucas's voice echoed through the church. "This woman isn't who you think she is." Roberto seemed paralyzed, not understanding what was happening. The guests began to murmur, shocked by the young man's audacity. The silence was replaced by a growing buzz of whispers, as everyone eagerly awaited an explanation. "Lucas, what are you doing?" Roberto asked, incredulous. "This is my wedding." "I know, Dad." Lucas looked straight into Helena's eyes, who remained still, her mask of calm beginning to crack. "I investigated Helena. She's not who she pretends to be." The church grew even quieter. Roberto, still confused, asked, "What did you find out?" Lucas took a deep breath. This wouldn't be easy to say. "Helena," Lucas paused, looking at the woman. She was married before. And that man, her ex-husband, he disappeared. The guests gasped in shock, and Roberto stepped back, trying to process the information. Helena finally spoke, with an eerily calm tone. "Lucas, dear, what are you saying? This is a misunderstanding." Lucas shook his head. "No, it's not." He pulled a crumpled sheet from his pocket, an old newspaper clipping. "Her husband disappeared under suspicious circumstances, Dad. He was never found." And do you know who the main suspect was? Her. The room was electrified. Everyone was in shock, including Roberto, who looked at Helena as if seeing a ghost. But Helena didn't lose her composure. She smiled, though her eyes were now cold. "That's ridiculous," Helena said with a nervous laugh. "Of course I was married, but that was many years ago, and my ex-husband died in a tragic accident. How dare you bring this up, Lucas?" But Lucas wasn't shaken. "Dad, I'm not done." He turned to Roberto. "There's more. And this is even worse." Roberto was stunned, waiting for the next revelation. Lucas knew the next secret would change everything. "Dad," he began, hesitating, "Helena has been convicted of fraud for deceiving wealthy men into marrying her and then disappearing with their money. She has multiple identities. This isn't even her real name." The guests became even more restless. Lucas's revelation seemed so unbelievable that people could barely process it. "That's a lie," Helena shouted, now visibly shaken. "You're trying to ruin your father's most important day." Roberto looked at Lucas, torn between anger and disbelief. The wedding was unraveling before his eyes. "Lucas, stop this," Roberto pleaded. "You can't destroy everything without proof." But Lucas was prepared for this moment. He had made sure to gather all the evidence. He pulled another sheet of paper from his pocket, this time a detailed report, and handed it to his father. "It's all here, Dad. I hired a private investigator." "Helena," he looked directly at the bride, whose expression now showed desperation, "has deceived men before, disappearing with their fortunes. And the scariest part is that many of them vanished, just like her ex-husband." Roberto read the document, his face growing paler with each line. He looked at Helena, unable to believe what he was reading. Helena finally lost her composure. She began shouting, denying all the accusations, but something in her voice betrayed her panic. Lucas, with one last breath, declared, "Dad, you need to stop this wedding now." Roberto was devastated. He loved Helena, but the evidence was undeniable. However, before he could say anything, Helena made a drastic decision. "This isn't over," she said in a low, threatening voice. And with a swift move, she ran out of the church, leaving everyone in shock. Helena fled the church, disappearing into the crowd. The guests were stunned, and Roberto was still processing what had just happened. He turned to Lucas, his eyes full of questions and pain. "Why didn't you tell me this earlier?" Roberto asked, his voice trembling. "I tried, Dad," Lucas replied, now relieved but still worried. "But you wouldn't listen to me. I knew this was the only way you'd believe." As Roberto tried to digest the truth, a feeling of betrayal overtook him. Everything he believed about Helena, the woman he planned to spend the rest of his life with, was crumbling. "What do we do now?" Roberto asked, his voice low. Before Lucas could respond, one of the church's security guards approached. "Mr. Roberto, we found something Mrs. Helena left behind." It was a small velvet box, seemingly a gift. Roberto opened the box slowly and saw an old ring, engraved with a name. A name that wasn't Helena's. That was the beginning of an even deeper mystery, a secret that tied Helena to a past darker than anyone could imagine. After Helena's escape, the atmosphere in the church was tense. The wedding had been abruptly halted, and now, Lucas and Roberto were trying to understand what was really going on. When the security guard handed over the small velvet box Helena had left behind, Roberto hesitated before opening it. He knew that the object carried profound meaning, but he didn't yet understand why. With a mix of curiosity and apprehension, Roberto opened the box slowly. Inside, resting delicately, was an old ring, intricately crafted from gold. The design was classic, with a small green stone in the center. But what caught his attention the most was the inscription engraved on the inside of the ring. Roberto carefully picked up the piece and, as he read the name engraved, his expression changed. "Ana Clara Montero?" Roberto murmured, perplexed. Lucas, standing beside his father, frowned. "Who is Ana Clara Montero?" he asked, studying the ring in Roberto's hands. Roberto shook his head, trying to remember if the name sounded familiar. He had never heard of Ana Clara Montero before, but the presence of that name on Helena's ring was no coincidence. What could it mean? A clue? A warning? Lucas, with his mind already trained to suspect everything since Helena entered their lives, took the ring from his father's hands and examined it more closely. The jewel seemed to have decades of history, indicating that this Ana Clara Montero was part of Helena's distant past. But how? Lucas knew he had to find out the connection between this name and the woman who almost became his stepmother. "Dad, this isn't a simple coincidence," Lucas said seriously. "She left this behind on purpose. It's like she's trying to tell us something." Roberto, still in shock, looked at his son with a mix of confusion and anguish. "But what?" he asked, desperate. "What does she want us to know?" Lucas was determined to find out. He knew that as dangerous as Helena was, she was also smart. Nothing she did was by accident. If she had left that ring, it was because she was trying to convey an important message, and Lucas was determined to understand what it was. That night, while Roberto retreated to his office, deeply shaken, Lucas began investigating the name engraved on the ring. He opened his laptop and, with the help of some research tools, began searching for information about Ana Clara Montero. The first results showed old records of a woman who had disappeared more than 20 years ago. Ana Clara Montero had been a promising young woman in high society, but after becoming involved in financial scandals and frauds, she mysteriously disappeared without a trace. What shocked Lucas was discovering that, besides her history of fraud, Ana Clara had been involved with dangerous criminal figures. Her last public appearance was directly tied to a large money laundering scheme. "This is getting stranger and stranger," Lucas whispered to himself. The more he researched, the more the pieces began to fall into place. Everything indicated that Helena, or rather, Ana Clara, had lived a life of lies, always changing her identity to escape the authorities. And now, she was about to marry his father, Roberto, without him knowing about her dark past. But the big question still remained. Why did she leave the ring? And what did she really want by trying to marry Roberto? Before closing his laptop that night, Lucas concluded that the ring was not just a keepsake. It was a key, a clue to something bigger that was yet to come. Perhaps Helena's past was even deeper than he had imagined, and the real reason she tried to marry his father was still hidden in the shadows. After the shock caused by the ring's discovery, Lucas knew there was no time to waste. He knew that the name Ana Clara Montero was only the tip of the iceberg, and he was determined to follow every lead that could uncover Helena's past. The search for the truth was beginning to take shape, but as he delved deeper, the mystery became even darker. That morning, Lucas woke up early and made a few calls. He decided to contact the private detective who had helped him before the wedding. The man, experienced and discreet, had already gathered valuable information about Helena earlier. This time, Lucas asked the detective to dig even deeper into the connection between Helena and Ana Clara Montero. While the detective began his investigation, Lucas dove into digital archives. He spent hours combing through records of disappearances, fraud cases, and old financial schemes. The more he read, the clearer it became that Helena, or Ana Clara, had been involved in a complex and extremely dangerous criminal network. Lucas began connecting the dots. Ana Clara wasn't just a woman involved in financial fraud. She had ties to important and powerful figures in the underworld. Old reports indicated that she had been last seen at an illegal casino in Buenos Aires before completely vanishing off the radar. And the question that tormented Lucas the most was, why had she come back? What was her real objective in marrying his father, Roberto? That afternoon, the private detective contacted Lucas with important news. Over the phone, his voice sounded serious and grave. "Lucas, I think we've found something big," the detective said, pausing to gather his thoughts. "The name Ana Clara Montero isn't just a fake identity. She used that identity for over a decade, but there are records that show she was involved in an international money laundering scheme." Lucas, listening intently, felt his stomach churn. He knew Helena was dangerous, but he hadn't imagined her connections ran so deep. "And that's not the worst part," the detective continued. "We found a link between Ana Clara and a European crime syndicate that operates in various sectors: fraud, trafficking, and, most disturbingly, forced disappearances. There are strong indications that she wasn't just involved with this group, but was one of its main figures." Lucas remained silent for a moment. The revelation was bigger than he had anticipated. Helena, who now seemed to be the same Ana Clara Montero, was a key player in an international criminal organization. But why, then, had she tried to marry Roberto? Was it just another con? Or was there something more? The detective pressed on. We also managed to trace some of the assets she's moved recently. There are recent financial transactions linking her to offshore accounts under different identities. But what caught my attention most was a large deposit made just a few months ago into one of these accounts. A deposit? Lucas asked, intrigued. How much are we talking about? About $2 million. Made in the name of a fake foundation she controlled. She was setting up to disappear again, Lucas. But something went wrong. Lucas began to grasp the gravity of the situation. Helena wasn't just deceiving his father. She was involved in something much bigger. But what could have gone wrong that made her leave the ring as a clue? And why was she exposing her identity so carelessly? That evening, Lucas returned home and locked himself in his room. He needed to organize his thoughts. The ring, which now seemed like a key to Helena's past, sat on his desk. He picked it up again, observing the delicate inscription inside. Ana Clara Montero, why did you leave this behind? Lucas murmured to himself, trying to unravel the mystery. Then, an idea struck him. The ring wasn't just a keepsake or a symbol of the past. It could be a clue to something even more specific. Lucas rushed to his laptop and began researching rare jewelry, old collections, and high-ranking families in Europe. It didn't take long for him to find something that left him speechless. The ring was part of a collection of stolen jewels from an aristocratic family in Europe about 20 years ago. The collection disappeared without a trace, and no one knew what had happened to it. The Montero family, to which Ana Clara belonged, was at the center of a major controversy after the theft, and some believed that she had planned the heist from the start. So, this ring, Lucas spoke aloud to himself, it's more than just a keepsake. It's part of a stolen treasure. The revelation was shocking. If Ana Clara, or Helena, had this ring, it was possible that she possessed other pieces from the collection. And this could explain her involvement with major international criminals. Helena wasn't just defrauding wealthy men. She was also trafficking rare artifacts and valuable jewels. Lucas couldn't help but think of his father. Roberto, a successful and honest businessman, had no idea of the danger surrounding him. But what made Lucas even more uncomfortable was the possibility that Helena might be using his father for something bigger. Perhaps she saw in Roberto a chance to launder the money she had obtained through her frauds and thefts. Or perhaps she wanted to hide under the reputation of an honorable man. Lucas knew he needed to tell his father everything, but he feared how he would react. The revelation that Helena was connected to international crimes, jewelry theft, and possible murders was too much to process all at once. He locked the ring in a safe in his room and decided that, the next morning, he would tell Roberto everything. They needed to be ready, because Lucas was sure that Helena hadn't disappeared for good. She would return, and when that happened, the confrontation would be inevitable. While father and son tried to find answers, Helena reappeared. This time, she wasn't alone. The police had located her in a luxury hotel in the city, but to their surprise, she wasn't fleeing. On the contrary, she was ready to face Lucas and Roberto. When Helena entered Roberto's office, her gaze was cold and calculating. Lucas was there, ready to confront her. "You came back," Roberto said, unable to hide his surprise. "Of course I did," Helena responded, with an enigmatic smile. "Did you really think I'd run?" "I'm not a criminal on the run, Roberto. What Lucas found is only part of the truth, but I'm here to reveal the whole truth." Lucas crossed his arms, skeptical. "And what would that be?" Helena slowly approached, keeping her eyes locked on Lucas. "Everything you discovered about Ana Clara Montero is true. I really am that woman. But what you don't know, Lucas, is that your mother was part of this too." The shock was immediate. Roberto took a step back, as if struck by an invisible blow. "What are you saying?" Roberto asked, his voice barely audible. "Your late wife, Laura, was involved in the same schemes as I was. We were longtime friends, but we took different paths. She chose to leave that life behind, to build a family with you. But the past always comes back. And when Laura died, I knew I had to fulfill the promise I made to her. What promise? Lucas asked, stunned. Helena took a deep breath, as if she were about to drop a bombshell. She knew that her dangerous past could one day threaten her family, and she asked me to protect you. I was supposed to get close to you, make sure you were safe. But I fell in love with Roberto. That was never part of the plan. Lucas and Roberto were in shock. Everything they believed about Helena, and worse, about Laura, was being turned upside down. Lucas still couldn't process the revelation. His mother, involved in criminal schemes? It didn't make sense. But the coldness in Helena's gaze made him reconsider. Was she telling the truth? Or was this just another one of her manipulations? Why should we believe you? Lucas asked, trying to keep calm. Helena smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. I knew it would be hard to believe, but Laura and I had a past you could never imagine. Of course, she changed for love of Roberto, but what we did before that, it can never be erased. Roberto, still shaken, finally spoke. If this is all true, why did you try to deceive me? I didn't try to deceive you, Roberto, Helena replied. I really fell in love with you. But as time went on, I realized I was bringing enemies from our past closer to us. The ring I left behind was a warning. They are coming, and you need to be ready. From that moment on, Lucas and Roberto began to see Helena in a different light. She was still a woman shrouded in mysteries, but she seemed to be telling the truth. As they discussed what to do next, danger drew near. Old enemies of Helena and Laura began to surface, demanding revenge and money. Lucas realized that to protect his family, he would have to trust Helena, even though she was the last person he wanted to believe. We need to prepare, Helena said, with a new determination in her voice. I don't know how many of them are still alive, but I know they won't stop until they get what they want. Lucas, reluctantly, agreed. We'll face this together. But if you're lying, Helena, I will find out. The days that followed were tense, filled with preparations and vigilance. Until one night, the inevitable happened. The past finally caught up with them. A group of armed men broke into Roberto's house, demanding money and revenge for Helena and Laura's betrayal. It was a night of chaos and terror, but in the end, Helena proved her worth. She faced the criminals, risking her life to protect Roberto and Lucas. In the final confrontation, Helena was gravely injured, but the criminals were apprehended. As Helena fought for her life in the hospital, Lucas and Roberto stayed by her side. They didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: their lives would never be the same.